All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 99 Pages Book Club. This is Rajiv Srinivasan, the moderator, broadcasting live from South Lake Tahoe, California, the reading capital of the world. We're on a mission to make reading fun and achievable for all. If you enjoy the conversation, please do hit subscribe below. Every vote of support counts. Please also consider following us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at 99 Pages Club. A couple admin notes before we get started. On August 30th, 1 week from today, we're going to start reading Cast by Isabel Wilkerson right here, 4:30 p.m. Pacific, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Please join us. I think this is going to be an incredible journey for us. We'll have a diverse panel from various different viewpoints, and we're going to showcase what civil discourse looks like on a very difficult topic in our country. But today, we're making time to speak with BHARAT Krishnan. BHARAT is the self-published author of Confessions of a Campaign Manager, which actually is the only self-published memoir in Amazon's top 100 political narratives list, just ahead of Madeleine Albright. So no big deal. He's since shifted his work from fantasy fiction, short stories, realistic fiction. He's got a new book coming out in just over a month. He works in his day job as a philanthropic consultant in Columbus, Ohio, but his biggest accomplishment ever is somehow convincing his wonderful wife, Dr. Manali, to marry him out in Columbus, Ohio. So please join me in welcoming BHARAT to 99 Pages. BHARAT, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you so much. You know, once I got Monali to agree to marry me, writing about magic just seemed like a natural fit.
Yeah, no kidding. I can imagine that's when all the fantasy fiction and stuff started coming out. But you got your start in politics, man. And, you know, one thing I should tell the audience before we get started, BHARAT and I have known each other since he was in diapers. Like, I've seen this kid really grow up. And what I love about BHARAT is no matter how old he was, he never was influenced by, you know, the glitz and glam of like corporate America or any of that nonsense, but he was always mission driven. And so you went to American University, you knew you wanted to study politics and campaigning, and you had this really interesting career in managing campaigns, primarily at the local government level, which is what I wanted to talk to you about today, because we just got done finishing reading 5 Days by Westmore. We learned a lot, had some great discussions about what life is like at that local level. So really fired up to dive into your book, Confessions, and talk about that experience. Quick note to the audience, please, we are monitoring the live chat. So go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from and what your favorite book is. And we'd love to get to know you as we start this conversation. So BHARAT, I got to say, the first thing that came to mind when I saw that you were reading a book is, I mean, bro, you must have been 27 years old when you decided to write Confessions. Yeah. Usually memoirs, especially, you know, by those who are in the list that you're competing on, they're written at the end of their careers, not at the beginning. So why did you feel the need to tell a story with your set of experiences at that young age?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got involved in politics really when I was 18 with Obama's first presidential campaign in 2007. And you know, I was in this somewhat unique position of working on the Obama campaign and then doing a lot of what the Obama campaign was about, which was, you know, we are the ones we've been waiting for, taking that kind of mindset and bringing it into local neighborhoods all across the country. And so I got to bounce around a lot. I felt like I had, by the time 2016 rolled around, unique experience as a minority campaign manager at the local level nationwide. Those are a bunch of small boxes to check. I thought I had a unique vantage point to tell a story of how the country got from Barack Obama to Donald Trump. You know, that kind of seismic shift. That's one. The second thing was I always knew I wanted to write a political memoir at the end of my career. And it just so turned out that 2016 was the end of my political career. For a couple of different reasons, the number one being that I found Monali, and I was ready to settle down and build a life for myself that just wasn't feasible in eating, living, and breathing politics 24/7. And so you're very much right that it's something that happens towards the end of your career. It just turned out that the end of this chapter was 2016, which is when I published.
So let's take yourself back to when you graduated and got your start. So one thing that has always fascinated me is like, you know, my impression of like life on a campaign trail is like you're not making much money, you're working tons of hours. I imagine this is true whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. It's not like these kids are just flush with cash and living the glitz and glam lifestyle. Like this is a really tough lifestyle that you got to do. And it just blows my mind, like that level of motivation and passion for a political campaign to draw these kids out. Like, put us in that headspace, man. Like, what was going through your heart? And I know that you went to school with people on both sides of the aisle. Like, what are some of those common traits that each of these kids have when they decide, hey, I want to commit my life to this game?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I had friends going back to 2008, my freshman year at college. I had friends working for Mike Huckabee, John McCain, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, all across the political aisle. You know, people have Super Bowl parties. We had Super Tuesday parties, man, doing getting crazy on primary nights. As corny as it sounds, people don't stick with this career unless they're true believers. You know, you might do one cycle on a presidential, you might work for a gubernatorial campaign or a US Senate campaign, and then your candidate gets elected, you take an administration job or a job as a lobbyist or a job, you know, with a political nonprofit. But the people who stay with the job, who jump from campaign to campaign, who are invested in going into these local communities, like I did for about 10 years, they're true believers. And that goes across the ideological spectrum. And I think that's a very good thing. That's actually something that consistently gives me hope for the country, is that these people aren't in short supply.
That's beautiful, man. So what I'm hearing is like, you know, even from a young age, these are folks that, regardless of their ideology, they're passionate about affecting that change, and they find these leaders, and they it sounds like they really have this like ideological vision of what America could be, regardless of where that vision lies on the ideological spectrum. It's that kind of passion for the country is actually really, it's wonderful to know that there are young people who have that. And it actually sounds, not to, detract too much from the political conversation, but, when I was graduating from West Point, one of my favorite things about the academy was just like everyone was there with this like passion to serve. And it sounds like there's some definitely some similarities there. So, all right. One of my favorite quotes is from Tip O'Neill, right? Former Speaker of the House, all politics is local. But right now we're in this period where I feel like most people don't know who their local officials are. Right. And the services that their state and county and city governments are providing. We're just so myopically focused, it feels like, on this federal story, the president, the Senate, like this reality TV show. This is before our current president, even Obama, Bush, whoever, it's always felt like, we're just getting so wrapped up in this stuff that's actually not local, that touches our lives day-to-day basis. I'd like to ask you, one, why is that? And two, what can we do as, reasonable people to to change that? Like, where should we be getting our news? What are some behaviors that lead to that sort of local level of awareness?
It's a great question, Rajiv, and I'm gonna give you a bit of a politician's answer here. Hopefully I'll get to all your main points, and you just steer me back if I go off base. I think the first thing is, media has shifted considerably since Tip O'Neill gave that quote in the 80s, right? You see the rise of cable news, correlating directly with the fall of local news. Even mid-sized outlets like the Denver Post, having to slash their newsrooms, having to be bought up by PE firms. There's really a dearth of local coverage at the exact same time that national coverage is exploding, and it's exploding in the most toxic way, right? It's exploding in a way that rewards the frankly nut jobs on cable news on both sides of the aisle. I mean, Sean Hannity on the right. You see a lot of just like overblown rhetoric on the left from, Rachel Maddow, whomever else. To be honest, I don't watch cable news, haven't in several years. And then also the explosive rise of social media, yes, but Facebook explicitly. Most people, I believe it's about 60% of people who consume news on a regular basis consume it from Facebook primarily. And so we all live in these crazy echo bubbles now. And honestly, it's going to be groups like 99 Pages that change that. People who are willing to engage on a one-on-one basis.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. We got some really interesting questions coming in from the chat. I want to start off with these questions get very high pressure, right? Because it's my mom and dad. All right. We gotta start somewhere, right? But at least if I can make this entertaining for my dad, that's all that matters, right? But he actually, when we were talking about young people getting involved in these campaigns, his question is: do you find that those leaders, those candidates, are reflecting the passion of the young? And I'm thinking back to all the conversations where you were bleeding your heart out on the campaign trail. And sometimes, and who I'm talking about, there were candidates who I was just like, we're not worthy of that passion. Yeah. So what is that relationship like? Like when a candidate, how often do they sort of reflect that passion? How often is it, kind of a mismatch?
So I would say on the whole, no, to be honest, on the whole, no. But something that actually does give me hope in the last 5 years, 6 years, is that has changed significantly. And it's changed for a number of reasons, but I actually have, I actually think there are some solid silver linings to the increased polarization of the last several years. And one of them is, like I said, you're getting more true believers than ever before. Look, political staff have always gotten beaten up. And so the ones who stay are true believers just by nature of that. Candidates now are getting beaten up in ways that they are not at all used to. And it's making them better. It's making them more and more true believers. If you are running for office in the 2020 election cycle, you believe with all of your heart why you are running for office. And that makes for a more passionate and thereby more considerate and more empathetic boss to this political staff.
Super interesting, dude. That's a great response. I never really thought about it. Just almost the vitriol can solidify that passion, right? Yeah. It's ain't table stakes no more.
Yep.
We had a great question, I think, from Samir. He asks us, how much actual support do local candidates and officials get from the big parties? I think that's really interesting, especially in the context of Citizens United, where it's you got billions of dollars flying around politically on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
How much money is coming in locally, and how are these local candidates getting their hands on that?
Yeah. So going back to your Tip O'Neill quote, I'm going to up you with another quote. Politics is about people. Fundamentally, politics is about people. And it's your job as a candidate and your job as political staff to broaden your network. There are people in every state in this country who have deep, deep coffers and believe passionately in issues. And it's your job to find them and convince them that you're lockstep and you can help them. When super PACs first came on the stage, and California, your state of California, just adopted a jungle primary system, meaning that all politicians, regardless of political party, are voted on a single ballot. And then the top two vote getters, regardless, it could be two Democrats, it could be two Republicans, are going to go to a runoff election if no one gets 50% of the vote. The first time that happened in a post Citizens United world, there was a congressional race in California, and two Democrats running for Congress. They made it to the runoff, and they actually had a super PAC for each of them. And that was the first time that had ever been seen. People were like, what? A congressional race can get a super PAC? Fast forward, literally a year later to 2013, I was working at a super PAC focused on New Jersey state legislative races. Man, we pumped $8 million into state legislative races in New Jersey. And it's just gotten more and more now. You see now big money flowing into district attorney races, state Supreme Court races, and state Supreme Court races in particular. I know Wisconsin had some recent high profile ones. They're getting more and more support from national parties, but it just depends. Once again, politics is about people. You get a high profile candidate who is good at networking, who can bring in someone from Emily's List, which is the pro-choice Democratic PAC, or someone who is affiliated with the Democratic National Committee or Republican National Committee. That's how it happens, man.
Super interesting, man. Another great question coming in from Samir. Are there private third-party consulting businesses that local candidates leverage for their campaigns? He sees Act Blue a lot when he gets candidate emails. Like, I guess really what this question is about, and I think this is super interesting, is like kind of the industrial complex around campaigning. What do you have like billions of dollars flowing around? Like, what are these? Right. How does it manifest itself in this corporate life? Yeah.
Yeah. The political industrial complex very much exists. And it's something that both sides, the far right and the far left, are both trying their hardest to dismantle right now. And I think that's a good thing. I can't say I'm a fan of the political industrial complex, coming from someone who was very much a part of it, to be honest. I worked for the Democratic Governance Association in 2012. It's again, it goes back to politics now becoming more and more about true believers who can take on that initiative. And you do really see it happen at the local level. In Seattle, for instance, they recently passed a levy of laws that beefed up their public financing system. But on the national level, you're frankly not going to see a lot of movement about this. It started in 2008 when Barack Obama said he became the first presidential candidate who didn't accept public financing for the general election. Culminating into now, with the current president doing a lot of stuff that's kind of outside of the norms of what you'd expect to see in politics. I do think there's a straight line, and both parties have plenty of blame to share there.
Yeah, no kidding, man. I think this is a really interesting question. Can you talk a little bit about the genesis of like negative campaigning, like the dirty side of politics? Like, I think on its surface, we want our elections to be this campaign of ideas, the campaign of ideologies. And yet I think we're fed a lot of negativity right now. Right. And I can't help but acknowledge that we're fed it because it works for whatever reason. Right. So I guess, how are we thinking about combating that? I mean, where did it come from? Is there ever an avenue to like turn back the dial and say actually positivity sells, or is this kind of the way we're going in from here on out?
I'm so excited someone asked this question, because it allows me to reference an incredibly obscure book about Abraham Lincoln. It's called Lincoln for President. Lincoln is kind of held up as the modern day political campaigner. You know, get out the vote efforts, writing letters to the editor, all, you know, going door to door. These are all techniques that Lincoln's campaign team kind of pioneered. In 1860, Republican National Convention, Abraham Lincoln going into the convention was not the leader in delegates, was looking like he may not be the nominee. His boss, his campaign manager, who was a federal judge, writes a prints tickets to get into the convention, prints fake tickets to get into the convention, distributes them, has those people go at the crack of dawn and flood the convention aisle. So then later, when people who had actual legitimate tickets showed up with their tickets, they couldn't get in. And that's how Lincoln won the nomination. And, you know, history tells us the rest of that story. So, you know, fast forward to the 80s with Lee Atwater running the racist ad, that's name I forget, that George Bush Sr. ran against Michael Dukakis. You know, we can go back to Lyndon B. Johnson running the Daisy ad in '64, saying, you know, if Goldwater gets elected, he's going to nuke the world. You know, it goes back and forth. You know,
so is your point? What you're saying is that it's all relative.
It's all relative. You know, we're a long way from Charles Sumner getting beaten half to death on the Senate floor.
Samir says, yeah, sounds like Frank Underwood in Netflix. Yes. For sure, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Why can't the world just be West Wing? You know, right?
Well, it's funny. The West Wing is actually, I know we love it, but the West Wing is actually getting some pushback right now in this environment. Some people are saying, oh, you know, it presented this wildly optimistic, unrealistic view of politics, and people thought that's actually possible. And if you could just, you know, everyone just got in a room together, they would fall in love together and just know they should do the right thing. And it kind of set us up for failure. I actually think this is a really fascinating conversation. I think the cultural zeitgeist really reflects where we are as a people in interesting ways. You know, the West Wing dominated the conversation in the late 90s, early 2000s. And now you're very much in a culture where people don't like the West Wing and are super into your House of Cards and your Veep, which is, by the way, Veep is the most accurate show about politics ever.
Why? What is it like? Give me that compare and contrast. Like, what is it about Veep?
You know, one of my favorite scenes from Veep, and I apologize, Auntie, it involves a little bad language. One of my favorite scenes from Veep is Selena Meyer, the vice president, is in Silicon Valley, and she's just meeting with this head of a social media firm, and she's looking for the bathroom, and she's like, you know, I need to use a bathroom. Do they have these here, or do they put their shit in the cloud too?
I know that scene. That's a good one.
Yeah. And then on the other hand, you know, you have the Mark Zuckerberg figure in that show, you know, calling her Selena instead of Madam Vice President. So this, again, politics is about people. And I think it just so realistically portrays the personalities you see not only in DC, but people who interact with those people. Like the contempt DC has for Silicon Valley and Silicon Valley has for DC, very much realistically portrayed, I'd say.
That's super interesting and honestly worth a double click here. But first, I got a question for you before we get off the TV stuff. Favorite West Wing episode?
Oh, man. It's got to be Two Cathedrals. I mean, that's yeah, I would say just about everyone says two cathedrals, but there's a reason, you know. Jed Bartlett, after Mrs. Landingham's funeral, spoiler alert,
If you haven't seen West Wing by now, like,
right,
we don't have any sympathy for you.
Speaking Latin, you know, cursing God, and then, you know, in the end, you know, he puts his hands in his pockets, turns around and smiles, and that's, yeah, goosebumps, man.
You were super cheesy, man.
Always.
I think mine, we've talked about this before. You asked me this question once. That's why I wanted to make sure I had it on you. I think at first mine was the filibuster, Stackhouse filibuster. That's a really fun one where it's a bunch of grandfathers like coming from the Senate to advocate for child health care, for autism. Like, it was really, I thought it was good. But now, especially now that I started 99 Pages, I think my favorite one is the Supremes.
Yeah.
Right, where the two, like the super conservative and super progressive judge, come in the same room, and you just see the sparks fly. I mean,
and Glenn Close, man, can't beat Glenn Close.
Can't beat it. You know, I want to go back to this point you made about the contempt between Silicon Valley and you know, DC and the federal government, because quite frankly, if we look at the landscape of our nation right now, these are really the two competing seats of power. Right, you've got our federal government, billions and trillions of dollars of, you know, tax revenues and government contracts and very powerful politicians, international relationships, and then you have effectively, you know, Facebook, Google, even though they're not headquartered in the Silicon Valley area, you know, they're in Seattle, but you know, Amazon and Microsoft, etc. We have Netflix down here. Like, this seems really dangerous in many ways. And I'm just curious, man, like, how do you wrap your head around these two competing centers of gravity of power in our modern country? And how does that affect a communication dynamic and just a governing dynamic in our country?
Yeah. So fundamentally different goals, right? Just like fundamentally different goals. And one recent example is the U.S. Postal Service. You know, the Postal Service is not supposed to turn a profit, right? Like government is involved in so many programs, primarily dedicated to social welfare, that just aren't supposed to be profitable. That's not their job. And, you know, clashing against the private sector, and especially, you know, organizations like Facebook, which let's face it, are countries, just based on their size, where very much and understandably everything is viewed through the lens of profit. So that's a fundamental disconnect you have to find a way to get through. And I say this not to say like, oh, it's all impossible, we're never going to get there. No, I think it's very easy. I think we've been doing it for several years, and it'll just take more innovation than, quite honestly, a bunch of old white dudes in their 60s and 70s and 80s can provide. That's something that really excites me, actually, is you've seen Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey and all these leaders come down on the Hill and get interrogated, you know, in hearings. You're really seeing leaders on both sides of the aisle, whether it's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Tom Cotton, senator from Arkansas, grill them and get more time in the spotlight. Because the fact of the matter is, it's not going to get better as long as someone who doesn't use these platforms and come with that understanding is in a position of power.
You know, that's so interesting you bring that up, man. Like, one of the most infuriating moments to me is whenever these tech CEOs come and testify before Congress. And we all know there's absolutely reasons, like there's antitrust reasons, there's privacy reasons, there's very significant issues at stake that we need to hold these big companies accountable for. And and I'm saying this, and I work for one, right? I work for LinkedIn and we're owned by Microsoft. Like, I want to make sure that we're in the right, and it's just so hysterical that you'll see some of these politicians that like have no conception, like they don't even know that like like Google has nothing to do with their iPhone, or like, how does Facebook make money if I don't have to pay to use it? Well, we sell ads, right? Like, it's just so interesting, this disconnect, and it's something that I hope that, like you said, man, this next generation of leaders has really gotta, we got to teach everybody how tech works, right? I want to bring in some questions from the chat, if that's all right, because I think this is great stuff, man. I'm just so grateful that you're letting us dive into this topic with you. And one thing I also wanted to call out, like, it's Bharat and I, we don't always agree on everything, right? We actually sit on very different sides of the ideological spectrum, and yet we're able to have this civil discourse, man. This is just firing me up. All right, I want to get some questions in. So Chelsea asks, for people who want to institute change, like really get involved, do you think government or corporate America actually has the biggest muscle? And this is something I know we talk a lot about, right? Chelsea and I, like, we definitely feel super blessed in our lives. Chelsea's my wife, if you couldn't put that together. And we're always struggling to figure out, like, how are we going to take these blessings in our life and actually turn them back to our country or communities, etc. And part of us is like, this is my running joke, I'm going to quit and go to law school and then go be a, go be a lawyer somewhere. We both kind of joke around about that, but at the same time, like, our skill set in corporate America, like being involved in business, learning how to sell, learning how to communicate these complex ideas, move big deals forward, like the tax revenue that we're able to generate for our country, like, these are also very valuable. So when you think about affecting change for those folks who are looking to get more involved in the solution, do you think that muscle lies in the government, on the private sector, or the public sector?
It's government. It's very much government. The numbers are just so mind-boggling. Now working in philanthropic consulting, actually something that my firm specializes in is public-private partnerships. Most of the projects, if not a plurality, involve public-private partnerships, and a lot of the philanthropy as an extension of the private sector can only do so much, one, and two, they don't have to do it all. The government is the most incredible resource a country has, and I would argue should have. In other words, if you're at a point in a country where the private sector is stronger than the public sector, that does not bode well at all for that country's future success. And I think you see that play out in a number of third world countries. But going back to America, let's say you're a nonprofit and you raise $500,000. The government, more often than not, will match that by a 2-to-1, 3-to-1, sometimes a 4-to-1 factor. So just by sheer numbers, the public sector is such a more robust tool for change. And you see that with 5 days you were talking about, all the policy initiatives. I caught some of the live streams. All the policy initiatives can really only be advanced at a governmental level. And I'd say that's one of the reasons why district attorney races, why state Supreme Court races are getting such renewed attention now. People are understanding local government can pull these levers much more efficiently than, say, MasterCard changing a corporate policy. That of course affects people, but it's also a question of what should be the private sector's priorities, right? It's great that Amazon raised its minimum wage for workers, but should that really be its job, or do we want a robust, functioning government laying out those rules so that the private sector can focus on what the private sector does best, make a profit in a fair and sustainable way?
Right on. You had me at profit, so I'm like, all right, let's do this. No, but no, you bring up a really great point, right? Like, I think what you're effectively saying is right now, like it's got to be a balance, right? And I can appreciate this, right? As a, I work in tech sales, and for me, I love the fact that we have private institutions that can experiment, take, and have like investors. Like if we think about the Congress of the United States as the board of directors, like if in many ways that governance layer is kind of asleep at the wheel right now. But if you ever look at any of these FANG M companies or any of the top, bigger companies, like those board of directors, they are governing, like they're, holding those leaders accountable, right? Like,
absolutely. And by the way, this was a huge part of the Stimulus Act that Barack Obama signed in 2009. That the $800 billion Recovery Act. People like to focus on the 3% that led to waste in a variety of projects. But look, if you were to take a company like MasterCard or Facebook or whatever, and 3% of the initiatives didn't work and 97% did, you would be pretty pleased, I think, with those results. And it led to, for instance, a real rise in wind energy, in smart batteries, a real explosive growth. And so it's always been a give and take between the government and the private sector. But I think they very much complement each other in ways that benefit both sides for the most part.
Yeah, super. Hey, we have some really great questions coming in right now that I want to make sure we call in. Amber Mace asks, can you talk about billionaires' involvement in elections? So she's talking about Steyer, we got Bloomberg, the Kochs. I'm not sure if we're going to, Trump is a billionaire. We haven't seen the tax returns. I don't know. So if you were them, where would you put your money? Targeted issues, getting certain candidates elected, get out the vote.
Right.
Like, especially, so honestly, and I think this is a really astute question, because in a Citizens United world, the billionaire's checkbook is exceptionally powerful. So, from your like campaign strategy, I'm just curious, like, what do you do?
So I think a couple things here. One, billionaires love running for office. So there's two sides of this. I will say, most billionaires you don't really hear that much about. The ones you do, your Steyers and Trump and Bloomberg, obviously they all ran for office. So that's one, and I think that kind of hustle, that kind of drive, that leads one to becoming a billionaire, leads you to thinking you're very smart in ways that transcend just making money. It's a very different skill set, making money versus running for office. And one thing this country loves doing is beating people up who have made a lot of money and now think they're entitled to run for office. And I don't say that with malice in my heart. That's just a fact. Of the top 10 self-funders in American political history, I think 2 of them have actually won office. So American voters, by and large, love being able to prove that, someone who's been incredibly successful can in fact fail at something. So that's one. The other thing is, you see a lot of people behind the scenes, the Koch brothers, Sheldon Adelson. On the left, you see George Soros. The smartest ones of that group, they've all built extensive networks that go through nonprofits, political 501c4s, to kind of mask their influence through third parties. And I think that has led to effectiveness in furthering a goal. So you have to be willing to take a step back, and in a lot of cases, your name, be willing to not let your name be linked to your initiative, unless some enterprising reporter uncovers it. The smartest people I've found hire, honestly, people like me. I mean, I'm a philanthropic consultant, but hire a political consultant to kind of run their, billionaires hire people to run their philanthropy. It's the same thing with politics. Hire a political consultant who can be in the weeds for you and figure out the best way to have a meaningful impact. And look, sometimes that's, can I get 5 minutes with the president of the United States? But a lot of more times for people like Tom Steyer before he ran for office, it was, what's the best way I can advance these specific policy goals?
Right on. Super interesting, man. We had a great question coming in from Lauren, excuse me. How much influence do you think lobbyists and corporations have on the outcomes of these elections and on legislation versus, the needs and the wants of the general public? Like, are these, is this sort of like we talked about, like this political industrial complex, but look, particularly with these, corporations, lobbyists, like we hear all these kind of, oh man, you guys are, our country is run by this amount of money flowing in. But I gotta say, like, when I think about the market, like, okay, so money is affecting politics coming in from lobbyists, et cetera. But then I ask my question, why is it that money works, right? Yeah. Money works because we as an electorate respond to the investments made by candidates, right? Like, I'm trying to figure out, where is the wheel broken? Do we first have to, do we go and fix the engagement of lobbyists and corporations and how they're influencing the funding efforts of candidates? Or do we as an electorate need to fundamentally change what we listen to and care about? Like, it feels a little bit chicken in the egg.
It's the latter. I'm gonna quote Barack Obama here. Nothing can silence the voices of millions of people shouting out for change. We saw that in 2010 with the rise of the Tea Party and people just storming congressional offices and making their voices heard and flipping 63 seats in the U.S. House that year. We saw it in 2017 where, Virginia, which is one of the only states Hillary Clinton performed better than Barack Obama 4 years earlier. In 2017, Virginia had state legislative elections. Virginia's state house is historically incredibly gerrymandered. Democrats had 34 out of 100 seats. It was kind of, the maps were drawn that way very intentionally. And somehow we flipped 15 seats that year, bringing us to 49 out of 100, where, the most wildly optimistic estimates, including my own, were we'd flip like 8 seats. So it all ultimately falls on the American people. Their voice has a tremendous impact, especially in an atmosphere like now, where more people than ever feel paralyzed so that they can't affect change. Calling your member a congressman, writing them a note, especially showing up to a city council meeting and actually like testifying about a bill. This all has tremendous impact.
Bharat, what's coming to mind right now, man? It's my time in Afghanistan. Right. And what I'm feeling right now is that these lobbyists, these corporations, they're able to build and help politicians build these arsenals of like massive reserves. They could buy the moon if they wanted to. And when we went to Afghanistan, like, we had every asset at our disposal, like hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes billions of dollars were following us around, protecting us, giving us weaponry, optics, like we could see in the night, like just crazy. But you know what? Some ragtag Taliban with, you know, a couple,
Right.
you know, a couple just ingenious ideas, some creativity and some resourcefulness who just decided to show up and fight. They've been keeping us at war for 20
Right.
years, right?
Right.
And it just kind of goes to show it's like this counterintuitive thing. Like we hear that these lobbyists and these politicians and, you know, are in cahoots with each other, and they're, you know, drumming up these massive reserves. But, you know, at the end of the day, you know, decisions are made by those who show up.
Exactly.
And sometimes if
Something I take immense pride in is a lot of us, us meaning Democrats, and not even Democrats, a lot of moderates, a lot of Republicans, to be honest, dedicated ourselves pretty much the day after Newtown in December 2013 to destroying the NRA. And 7 years later, the state of New York has issued a lawsuit basically to dissolve the NRA. So change is very, very slow, but it can happen. And it happened honestly because one pissed off mom formed a Facebook group, and that translated into a lot of policy wins and political wins in the years to come.
Super interesting, man. Look, we are like, man, this has been an amazing conversation, and we're taking up a ton of time. I need to like talk about your writing, like you are an author. So maybe we can talk about that for a second.
About books, yeah.
Talk about books. All right. So I want to go through, like, first off, you're a self-published author, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I want to just, you know, so on our like Instagram, for example, and in a lot of our social media, we actually have built some relationships with a lot of authors out there, some published by the big publishing houses, some with smaller publishing houses, some self-published. Yeah. Like, can you talk to us a little bit about that? You know, first off, the choice to self-published, and then like, why is it different? Why is it better? Why is it worse? I'd love to, you know, I'm sure there's people who would really love to hear that advice.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love this question. It's very different. You know, if you are trade published, you, and I'm going to talk about fiction now because my experience is predominantly in fiction. If you're trade published, you write a manuscript, great. You shop it around to some of your friends. You make some writer friends. They give you feedback. You self-edit it. Awesome. You get it to a position where you think it's ready to look at an agent. And that's really key. You need an agent because pretty much any publishing house worth its salt will not accept a manuscript from you. They'll only accept it from an agent. So then you go into a process called querying, where you basically seek out an agent representing the kind of book you're writing, you know, whether it's young adult or a mystery or a thriller or, you know, whatever. And you write a finely tailored query letter, basically convincing them, hey, you should read my manuscript. You send out literally hundreds of those. And then one day, an agent writes you back and says, hey, this is great. I really like it. Send me the full manuscript, because you've sent them maybe 50 pages. So they say, hey, great. Send me the full manuscript. They get that. Let's say they love it. They give you a call. You go into contract negotiations, and you sign with this agent. Then the agent has to submit that story to different publishing houses. You have to find an editor who works at one of these publishing houses who will fall in love with your manuscript, and they will pitch that story as, you know, as a reason why the publishing house should sign you. And then once you sign the deal, you've made it. But the publishing house has a lot of books, and they have a lot of books across all genres. So maybe they're full up on thrillers. You wrote a banging thriller, but you know what? We don't have space for a thriller in our release schedule until a year and a half later. So congratulations, you're going to see your book on a bookshelf in 1.5 years. And that's generally how it goes. I have a dear friend who just signed a deal, a 7-figure publishing deal. She will see her book in spring 2022. So it's a long wait, and I'll be honest, I don't have time for it.
All
You know,
right.
by the end of the year, I would have published 7 books in 4 years. I just don't have time.
7 books in 4 years. I'm so proud of you, man. That's awesome. Let's go
Thank
through.
you.
So we obviously have been talking about Confessions of a Campaign Manager, about your
Mhm.
actual like political experience, and that's fantastic. Then you wrote a book about a short stories book
Yeah.
about your trouble with addiction. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tales from the Bottom of a Bottle is very much something I kind of pieced together. You know, I've been sober. I had a drinking problem. I'm an alcoholic. I have been sober now for a little over 5 years. And writing really helped me come to terms with my drinking problem. And, you know, I wrote a short story here, a short story there. I got one actually published in an anthology in the United Kingdom. And you know, within like a couple of years, I had 4 short stories compiled together that kind of told the disjointed life of from not even realizing you have a drinking problem to realizing it to now like, oh, you know, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to get clean. And so I kind of decided, again, the joy of self-publishing, I decided to slap it together, you know, very makeshift editing. I'd had one of the stories professionally edited before, so that helped a lot. I honestly, I took a picture of a bunch of my empty alcohol containers that I keep just kind of as a reminder in my basement. Made that the cover and published it, and it got really tremendous feedback, especially from former addicts.
I can imagine. Yeah.
And it's basically a fictional account of what I went through. It's very much magical realism, but yeah, it's called Tales from the Bottom of a Bottle. It's like $2.99 on Amazon.
Tales from the Bottom of a Bottle. All right. Well, we're all going to be sure to pick that one up. That's because I mean, honestly, it's just incredible. And one thing that I really love about your stories is that they're all, I mean, and I'm not sure if this is actually true of all fiction, but they're so rooted in your own identity. You know, even though you've made that shift to fiction, I think one thing as an avid reader myself that I'm starting to discover is you really can learn more from fiction than you can from nonfiction sometimes.
Absolutely.
You know, and on that bookshelf back there, you know, I've got every nonfiction, like I got Isaacson, Doris Kearns Goodwin, I got Chernow, I got, you know, John Meacham, I've got all these names. But you know what's really interesting is that they can't speak from any degree of certainty about what was going on in the, you know,
right. So it's one of
right?
it's one of the reasons you know, I'll take this to a macro level again, and again, just, you know, bring me back to earth if I go totally off base. But you know, the American public aren't going to pay billions and billions of dollars to see a movie about Donald Trump or a movie about Barack Obama or even a movie about Steve Jobs or, you know, even The Social Network, which was tremendously successful. Nothing compared to the commercial value of an Avengers movie, of
yeah, that's true.
you know,
yeah.
X-Men, of whatever. And you can laugh at that, and that's you know, you can say, you know, oh, they're just popcorn flicks. But you know, we defeated the Klan on the Ku Klux Klan in the 40s on the cultural landscape of Superman comics, talking about how he's an immigrant, talking about how we have to respect other opinions, literally fighting Klan members in his comics. The gay rights movement is so successful today because in the 90s, people like me grew up on X-Men, the animated series, and were introduced to, you know, we all are different, and our differences make us stronger, and our differences should be talked about.
Wow, that's actually a really great point. Like through those fiction narratives, they do shape society. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. Last thing we're going to talk about before we begin our sign off, I would love to hear a little bit more about your upcoming book, Privilege. This is something I think is kind of timely, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on. And if you wouldn't mind just letting us know what you're working on now.
Yeah, absolutely. So Privilege is fundamentally a story about how I've viewed the last 5 years. It's a political thriller, and it's ultimately about a set of Indian American friends, which are very much based on my best childhood friends. A group of Indian Americans in modern day New York who steal a super drug. And so I would say it's House of Cards meets Ocean's 11. It's very much a heist novel, but it has a deep political undercurrent.
Very cool, man. Well, listen, Barth, I just want to thank you so much for spending some of your Sunday evening with us. I'm sure Manali misses you. You're both working super hard. Like, you deserve time together, and we're sitting here talking about these books. I'm just so grateful. So thanks again, man. This is a great conversation. I always love spending time with you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
All right, folks. Again, guys, this is Rajiv Srinivasan. 99 Pages is on a mission to make reading fun and achievable for all. We're trying to change the way we talk to each other. And I think you saw a little bit of that today with my conversation with Bharrat on his book, Confessions of a Campaign Manager. Make sure you check it out on Amazon. He also talked about his fiction series, Oasis, Privilege, which is coming out in October, and then Tales from the Bottom of a Bottle as well. So definitely check him out. Very successful self-published author, and a great friend to us all. So again, quick reminder, on August 30th, we're going to start this mission right here. We're reading Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. We're going to talk about some really difficult we're going to talk about some really difficult topics for our country right now. And we've assembled this really amazing, diverse panel from across the geographic, the socioeconomic, the ideological landscape of our country. And I think we're going to have some real good conversations that are pretty fun, interesting, and civil, which we're really excited about. So join us. That's on August 30th, 4:30 p.m. Pacific, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, right here on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't already, it really, really means a lot to us if you hit subscribe below. It just is a vote of confidence so that we can keep doing what we're doing. And be sure to follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram at 99 Pages Club. And again, thank you for your time. It means the world to me that you're here spending your day with us. And if you have any questions, reach out to us.